So I'm changing the oil on the 59 Bel Air's 348. I'm probably going to be done driving the car for the winter here soon. And I'm going to take the car up to my dad's, put it in his garage, so if I have a project that I end up picking up, I can work on it in here. But anyway, I did look at a 59 Edsel Villager station wagon yesterday. And the body, it was an Arizona car, and it was a pretty solid car. The bottom of the rear quarters were rotted out. But it was missing like this is the slave cylinder and the power steering on this car, and that car had similar power steering setup. And the slave cylinder was missing. The spool valve was there. That's the spool valve. It goes on the bottom of the pitman arm, and then as you turn the wheel, it moves a little valve in there and senses which way to put pressure on that cylinder to run the steering linkage across. But the spool valve and the lines were there, but it was missing the brackets and the pump. The engine was pretty cruddy on the inside, so the engine needed to come out and go through. And the transmission leaked really super bad. I mean, you could see it was just a crust of dirt and grease and crud and oil, and it was obvious it had a pretty bad leak. And Ford is notorious for front pump oil seal leaks, which is the big O-ring where the pump bolts into the case. So the guy wanted quite a bit of money for the Edsel wagon. It was a solid car, but it needed chrome, and it needed one window, needed a complete interior. The body and interior wasn't the issue on that car. It was mechanically. It needed control arm bushings. It needed everything, ball joints, tie rod ends, springs, all the suspension, brakes, engine and transmission needed a complete going through. So they said it ran, but they couldn't get it started. So I'm going to say it didn't run. But anyway, I'll show you some photos of the car. The guy didn't want me filming there, but I'll show you the photos in the ad. So these are the photos of the car. It had a 332 two-barrel single exhaust. And the front, the radiator grill, I don't know if it shows up, was missing a little piece right there. So it needed that part of the radiator grill replaced. The fenders, inner fenders, pretty solid car. The engine was the original paint on it. The body was mostly the original paint. That back door window was busted. The passenger front door would not latch. It just, you can see where it had been duct taped shut. So the power steering pump, which would have probably went in there, was missing, and you could see the rusty belt pulley where the belt ran. It had power brakes. It had the brake pedal push, but it had no brakes. You can see the power booster and the master. The inside of the master was clean and the fluid was clean. So, I don't know what the deal was with the brakes, but I'm sure they needed to go through. The radiator was completely plugged up and dry. And the glass bowl on the fuel pump was missing. They were putting gas in the float bowl and trying to get it going. It wouldn't go. It needed a total interior redo. The dash even needed a repaint. The top of the dash over in here was rusty. The quarter panels were rusted out from there all the way down to the bottom here, right to the very bottom on inner and outer. Tailgate had just a little bit of rust right there, and that was the only rust in the tailgate. And most of that's the original paint on the car. I'd say 90% of the paint was factory original. So it was in good shape for what year it was. So I just thought I'd show you some photos of the car that I did go look at. So when I say that Edsel needed a complete suspension rebuild, these are the control arm bushings in here. There's a metal doohickey with rubber bushing in it, and that rubber gets hammered out, and they're hammered out, and it had little twist things in the coil springs to spread them out. And the ball joints, when they've been replaced, they usually have bolts instead of rivets that hold them in. And it had rivets still, so they're original ball joints, and they looked rough. They were loose. Tie rods were loose. It looks like I got a bushing going bad on my sway control. Right there, starting to go bad. So in the spring I'll replace that. But these are, this car has a bazillion. This is my Bel Air again. I'm under, not an Edsel. But yeah, so I gotta grease the chassis. This thing has grease fittings up there, tie rod, lower ball joint. Let's see if I can get this over here on the spool valve. The slave cylinder, inner tie rod ends, outer tie rod end again, ball joints, and then there's a bell crank for the clutch between the engine and the frame that has a grease fitting on it. I did convert this to a spin-on oil filter, so those canisters are just kind of a pain in the rear. And the oil pan leaks on this car, so it gets oil between right in here, and the same in the rear of the engine. It doesn't leak where the gaskets to the engine block are. It leaks where this rubber seal is between like the timing cover and the pan, and where the pan and the rear main cap there's a rubber seal, much like this. It leaks at both ends on the oil pan there, so I guess if I wanted to stop the oil leak I'd have to pop the oil pan, which I'm not going to do. So in the future, if I ever rebuild the engine, I'll do it then. So anyway, I'm going to get to greasing the chassis up. It looks like the oil's almost done. Just a little drip here and there. And I'll grease the chassis up, and then I'll put the plug back in and the filter on and oil it up and take it for a little run around the block if it's not raining. They're predicting something 90% chance of rain today. So I already took it out, did my errands with it this morning to warm it up to change the oil. And check the power steering fluid. Now this, I don't use the stick. There you can see the filter down in there. Just as long as there's a little fluid on that filter, that's all I care. Because if I get it too full, it just gushes out and runs out everywhere. It was a poor GM design with that small of a filler neck. The 55, 6, and 7 had a rather big neck that came straight up, and they wanted to overflow. The 58 had a fairly tall neck that was straight up. Thin like this, but tall. And the 59, it was because they had lowered the hood, you know, tried to make the cars longer and lower and sleeker. They tilted this forward on an angle just a little bit, and they lowered it a good inch, maybe more, yeah, probably an inch. And so now if you fill it to the full mark on the stick when it's hot, the fluid's right there. Well, if you get stuck in heavy traffic and the fluid really gets hot, it comes out and gets all over everything. So I just make sure I see it on the filter down in the can there, and I've never had any issues with it. So I'll check the brake fluid. I'm going to check all the fluids, and then they'll be ready for winter storage. And then in the spring I always check the fluids again. Yeah, the fluid's good. And that, in case they leak out over the winter. And the radiator's pressurized, so I'll wait until it's cold to check the coolant. This is the oil fill on the Chevy, and it's also a crankcase breather. And one thing you look at when you're looking at used older cars, look at the inside of it. You can see this one's been clean. It's obviously been a maintained car. When that's all black or got dirty, cruddy, carbony like sludge up in there, that's a sign the oil wasn't changed, and that's the way the Edsel was. And you can even see down in the engine, if I can get the light right, it's even clean down in there. You're looking at the casting of the lifter valley there. So this engine's been a well-maintained engine. I'm going to also check the gear lube in the transmission and the gear lube in the differential and the air and the tires. So, and I'll oil the oilers. It's got 3 oilers, 1, 2, and a third one on the distributor. So in greasing your fittings, I always just grease them until like 1 or 2 pumps until I see a little grease come out of the boot or the boots on the ball joints inflating. So that's all I'm going to put in that, and then I'll wipe up that extra grease and I'll put it on the ball joint next. And again, I'll just inflate that. Let me get the light here. Hang on, it's caught. Okay, I got the grease gun on the ball joint. You'll see the boot inflate a little bit as I pump the grease into it. Can you see it inflate? That was 3 pumps, usually about 2 or 3 in the ball joints, 1 or 2 in the tie rod ends. That's all I'm going to put in that. I can see the boot expanding, and I can see a little grease oozing out there. So that's typically how I grease it. Now the spool valves are important that you only put 1 pump of grease in them, because if you over grease it, it can affect your steering. So just 1 pump. That's it for the spool valve. So I'll go around and finish greasing the fittings here. This is the oil filter I use. I know a lot of people will probably complain I'm using a Fram. My brother does all the time, but these engines only have about 30 pounds of oil pressure, so this filter is fine. The surface for where this rides, you want to oil this and then wipe the surface this goes on the engine clean, and make sure the old gasket isn't stuck up in there. Make sure it's in the filter or off the old filter. You don't want to double gasket it, you'll leak. So I always just wipe that surface where the filter goes and then screw the filter on. And I oil this gasket surface. And this screws up this way. I could put oil in it, but you got to kind of wiggle it around the exhaust pipe to get it up in, and it just spills out. So I am not going to pre-fill the filter on this car. I can't see what the video's videoing, but I'm thinking that's the oil filter adapter. This car originally had a canister oil filter, and I took it off and put that spin-on adapter on. And maybe the clutch linkage shows up there that has the grease fitting. I don't know. I'll find out when I go to edit the video. So I'm going to throw the new filter on and get the oil in the engine. Then I'll jack it up and grease that fitting and check the gearbox and stuff. I don't do it because you can see where the drain plug is at the front of the sump there, the deep part. So if I jack it up, it leaves oil in the back part of the sump there, so I don't get all the oil out of the engine. So that's why I just let it sit on the ground while I drain the oil. So there we go, oil filter is on. See the shift linkage where it goes into the gearbox. The drain plug on the gearbox. The fill plug's on the other side, so. And again, I'll lubricate that when I jack it out. And you can see the control arm bushings back here too. I've replaced them on this car like probably 25-30 years ago. So yeah, it's still pretty clean on the underneath for the age of the car. And this is the oil I'm using, and the reason why I use conventional oil as opposed to synthetic is on these older engines. They leak oil if you use synthetic. This engine's not been rebuilt. If it's been rebuilt and had new seals and gaskets, yeah, I'd use synthetic in it. But the molecules in synthetic oil are smaller than the molecules in crude oil. So usually if you have a little oil leak, they're much worse with synthetics than with conventionals. And this has a little oil leak. Both ends of the oil pan leak. That's the only oil leak on the engine. The valve covers, none of the seals leak. But each end of the oil pan leaks, so that's why I use this. And I also make sure you clean your funnel out. You don't want dirt going into your motor from your funnel. So I always clean my funnel before I put the oil in the engine. Alright, now the grease fitting shows up. The grease fitting's right there on the bell crank for the clutch. Another thing I do, you know, if you have a 3 on the tree and you want it to work correctly, the trick with it is making sure all your bushings are tight where they go in here and here. Make sure this bell crank isn't all loose and floppy. I had to weld that in at one time. So, you know, it's a little loose, but that's about the way they are from the factory. Those three on the tree and this thing shifts great. These are nice and tight. That's nice and tight up there at the steering column. So just make sure they're all good and your clutch linkage is all good. This is the linkage to the clutch. That's the fork that works the clutch in there. A little oil from that oil leak. It's kind of everywhere. But you can see the underneath of this car's, that's still bare steel on the frame. You can see the underneath is in pretty decent shape. I had the drive shaft balanced and the front tube was slightly damaged, so I just had them replace the front tube on the drive shaft. I did that when I rebuilt the transmission. I had to put a new synchronizer clutch in it. I didn't video it because that was before I had this video camera. You can see the fuel line, brake line, hydraulic line, and this is the old X-style chassis. So you can see it's a fairly solid old, let me get the light here where it shines down there. Well, I guess I'm not going to get the light to where it shines down there, but yeah, it's, oh, there we go. You can see it's fairly clean old car. So anyway, I'm going to grease that fitting, and if this shows up, that's the plug. The gear lube should just be right there at the plug. So I'll video that when I get to it. So that's the road draft tube. That's what the crankcase ventilator is. Now this is the rear of the car. That's the front of the car, front that way. So what happens is the wind blows underneath the car as you're driving down the road and draws on that as the wind's going by. It pulls fumes out of the crankcase. So that's the way cars before positive crankcase ventilation ventilated the crankcase. And that oil cap is that I took off to show you is the intake for the crankcase ventilation system when you're driving. When you're stopped, obviously you don't have wind blowing through here creating a vacuum, so then the smog or whatever from the crankcase comes out that oil cap, and if you're stopped long enough it builds up a little bit under there and runs out from the edge of the hood a little bit. You can see it. Sometimes, you know, when I go to cruises and I stop and open up the hood, it's smokes out of that for a few minutes, you know, just a light hazy smoke. I'll see if I can get some on video if I warm it up enough after I change the oil. You got to run it pretty good to get it warm enough to do that. But that's the road draft tube, so we're going to pull the plug on the trans, and you use one of these special sockets for square plugs so you don't damage your plug. Okay, as soon as I undid that, oil started to run out before I even pulled it away. So the gearbox is full, so I'll run that back in and tighten it back up. It is important to make sure you check your fluids in your gearbox. A lot of people don't, and they run low and then they destroy them. That when I worked in car dealers and when I work on old cars with manual transmissions, most of the failures of the manual gearboxes from being low on gear oil, lack of maintenance. So always check your gear oil. It only takes a couple minutes, and I don't trust a half-a-cent O-ring and a hydraulic jack, so always use yourself some jack stands, and I always set the car on them so it doesn't drop on them suddenly and collapse them or something if the 1 cent O-ring goes bad in the hydraulic jack. So always use yourself a good set of jack stands. Alright, so I guess I'm done under here. Can kind of see the underneath a little bit. So let me get the rear axle checked and the air and the tires checked, and we'll go for a little ride. Now oil the oilers too. Oh, and while I'm under here, I always look at the backing plates on all four wheels, see if any of them are oily. If they're oily by around the wheel cylinder or from the wheel cylinder down, you got a leaking wheel cylinder. If they're oily, just at the bottom. And the rears, if they're, you can have an axle leak or a wheel cylinder leak in the rear. So always look at your backing plates. If they're oily, pull your wheel and look and see why. You either got a leaking grease or grease seal or leaking wheel cylinder, or on the rear an axle seal or a wheel cylinder. So always check your backing plates when you're under your car too. Well, there's an oiler on each end of the generator, and if you notice, the tips of these old oil squirt cans have a little thing that's to grip the oiler, and that way I can do it with one hand. Then you just fill the oiler up to the top and do your next oiler. And then there's one on the distributor too. And people ask me quite a bit, why don't I put an alternator on here? Two reasons. The power steering pump's driven off the back of the generator. And second off, I've never had any problems with generators. They keep the battery up. I always turn the key, the car starts. You keep the oilers oiled, maintain them, and for, you know, as often as you drive these cars, generator is more than adequate. That's a 35 amp, and I've never had, like I say, I've never had any issues with a generator. It always charges, and never had an issue with it. It's been on the car. I put power steering, and this car originally did not have power steering or power brakes. Took that off one '59 Chevy parts car and this off another one and rebuilt them and put them on this car. But that generator I rebuilt before I put on. When I say rebuilt, new brushes, new bearings, cleaned it all up, you know, checked it all out, painted it up. So basically, you know, make sure it was all good. And they will run as a motor if they're good too. So I have no issues with generators whatsoever on these old cars. A lot of people can't stand them and they go to alternators right away, but I've not had an issue, so that's why I just leave the generator on it. And that one's been on it, I'm going to say 30 years anyway. I think this car's had power steering on it at least 30 years now, so 30 years that's been charging the battery and keeping the car going, and has not been off since I put it on there. Alright, let me get the distributor oiler. I got to get the air cleaner on. This one's a little bit of a bear because you got to tilt the oil squirt can and it doesn't keep the oil in the thing. There we go. That oiler was full. So all the oilers are oiled. Important to keep them oiled. GM says the oilers every 1,000 miles. I fill the oilers probably every 6-8 weeks or so. But at the end of the season I do them, and at the beginning of the season, because over the winter the oil dissipates, you know, runs out. So I give them a quick oiling before I start driving the car in the spring too. So that's the oilers. So I'll check the diff and the air in the tires, and we're done. This is one of those too. You look at your backing plates, see that one's nice and dry, and this one's nice and dry. And I just wiped the diff off so I wouldn't get any dirt in it. And I'm careful because sometimes the oil just runs out, and if it does, I don't want to get it everywhere. See the oil running out? So the oil's full in the diff. And usually if you don't have any leaks, they're full. There is a breather on the diff. You want to make sure that that's clear. That is right. See if I can get my light up here on it. That is right there is the breather. So I just give them a clean off. They get dirt and crud on them, and then they plug up, and if they plug up, they pressurize your, let me see if I can, there, I think it shows up, I can't see the screen, but that's the breather. Make sure that's clean, because if they plug up, it'll pressurize, the gear oil will pressurize the diff, and it'll start leaking out your axle and pinion seals. So always make sure that's clean. So this still has the original parking brake cables on it, and I use the parking brake all the time. That's why they still work. So yeah, a little more of the underneath of the car. You can see it's in nice shape for being just about a 60-year-old vehicle. Alright, let me get the oil pressure up in the engine, check the oil filter for a leak. When checking your tire pressure, don't forget your spare. So nothing more aggravating than getting a flat and having a flat spare, so always check that. That was the sticker off the tires I put on the car, I don't know, maybe 6 years ago. The spare's been in the cars, God, as long as I've had the car. So, BF Goodrich. Silvertown, same as what, these are reproduction. So, yeah. And again, the 1959 Montgomery Ward cooler that was my dad bought new. Okay, so I didn't prime the oil filter on this, so we're going to just let it idle until the oil pressure comes up. Alright, we got oil pressure. So I'll take the car for a little ride, warm it up, check the oil, and make sure the oil filter and stuff is not leaking. .348's happy to have new oil in it. And I don't see any leaks. I put a drip pan under the car just to catch any of those little drips from the engine. Alright, let's go for a little ride and warm it up. Alright, this is the logbook I keep on the car, the maintenance record. And you can see the past oil change was 10/19/17, and it was 94,325, and this one's 9/24/18, 95,678. So I only didn't put a lot of miles on the car. It had a busy year and just didn't get the car out and use it like I wanted to. Had a lot going on this year. But I'm still going to drive it. I'm going to take it up to my dad's and put it in his garage for the winter, and when I go up there and do yard work and stuff, I'll take it out for rides and stuff out in the country now and then. So I'll probably put another couple hundred miles on it yet before the season's out. Another thing, another one of my viewers saw this in one of my other videos, and this is if you had power steering in your car, they would hang this on the rearview mirror and the little steering wheel turns and it says different things. So we'll turn the steering wheel to the next one. Yeah, so these just hung on the rear view mirror. If the car was on the car lot and had the power steering accessory, that's where they hung, usually facing out the window. So if you're walking around the car lot, you could see it. You know, it would face out that way on the mirror as opposed to this way. But yeah, it's just a dandy little promo thing. I hang it on the mirror now and then if I go to car cruises. But yeah, it's the Impala steering wheel. This is a Bel Air steering wheel, so you can kind of see the difference. So anyway, we'll go for a short ride. Almost forgot to turn you on for the ride. Okay, I'm going to turn the camera off. Everybody's ridden in the car. I just thought I'd do a short ride after changing the oil and stuff. My little dog. Not much bigger than the squirrels that were running for their lives. That goes just to a dirt pile right there so people can get dirt for their gardens and stuff. Okay, we got the car done. We'll throw it back in the garage here in a couple minutes. Got to set the parking brake here. So again, if you enjoy my videos, please subscribe, and thank you for watching. Well, I couldn't take the stick out, wipe it off, and hold the camera at the same time, so I'll just shove the stick down in there, pull it out, and we'll have a look at the oil level. Right on full. I don't know if you can see that. Oil's so clean you can hardly see it on the stick, but it's right on the full mark. So the car is set for the winter. Always change the oil in the fall, you know, so you don't have any contaminants from the oil in the engine over the winter. It's nice to have clean oil in your engine. A couple 200-300 miles isn't going to hurt, but you know, if it's got over 1,000 miles on the oil, I change it. A couple other places I put a drop oil is right here. This is the clutch linkage pivot on the bell crank, and then there's a little fiber seal down there on the crank to keep the grease from coming out. And I always put a drop or two oil on that, and it runs down the frame and drips on the ground for a day or so. But I like to keep that wick oiled, and that pivot there oiled. It just makes the clutch work a little easier. So anything that moves or pivots or anything, keep them lubricated. It will last longer. It's the end of the growing season. Some of the 4 o'clocks are open. That's a pretty big flowers on these. They're hibiscus. Bear's breech. You had to take some of the impatiens out there starting to fizzle. castor beans, huge. Those are the seed pods, those burr looking things. I don't know if they show up or not in the video. Kind of cooled off. We went from the 90s to the 60s overnight. But it is almost October. I'm doing pretty good considering how late in the year it is. This is a house plant. It's in a huge pot. Those leaves are giving an idea of the size of them. It's a house plant. All the ones in the pots are house plants. I just put them outside in the summertime. They go nuts. That fountain's probably from, I'm going to guess, 66. It was on my mom and dad's patio for a long, 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 long time.